We've also brought in amendments to empower provincial governments to create parallel production licensing regimes in order to give provinces the flexibility to implement legalization in the manner best suited to their jurisdiction. For example, this would have allowed provinces to let craft growers, small-scale producers, and outdoor growers, artisanal growers, compete against large federally licensed corporate entities. That was voted down by the Liberals. We proposed to decriminalize the penalty section in line with the Tobacco Act. We propose that this legalization should take a regulatory approach with significant fines for offences rather than criminal ones. One of the purposes of Bill C-45, as laid out in Section 7, is to, quote, reduce the burden on the criminal justice system in relation to cannabis, end quote. Well, penalties in this bill, in the NDP's view, should be consistent with that stated intent. Now, with the Liberal government's rejection of these amendments, I am very concerned that C-45 will continue to harm many Canadians, and that's after it becomes law in this country. Unconscionable prison sentences, arbitrary possession limits, and barriers to small craft and artisanal producers are just a few of the damaging provisions that do need to be corrected. I am heartened, however, that this bill at least contains a mandatory review of C-45's operation in the next Parliament. I view this as a tacit admission by the government that they know that this bill contains problematic sections that will need to be fixed. In fact, it was Liberal amendment to move the review from 5 years to 3 years. I think the Liberals know that this bill has flaws that need to be fixed. Truthfully, I'd prefer to get it right the first time around. As it currently stands, the federal government has left the heavy lifting of legalization to the provincial, territorial, municipal, and Indigenous governments. Now, the task force on cannabis legalization was very clear in the lead-up to legalization that the federal government should, quote, take a leadership role to ensure that capacity is developed among all levels of government prior to the start of the regulatory regime, end quote. And yet, when asked if the federal government had even been talking with First Nations and Indigenous governments on a nation-to-nation basis to ensure that capacity was developed, Ontario Regional Chief Isidore Day told the Health Committee, quote, no, they haven't. And again, it's going to be really critical. Now, by freezing out stakeholders and insisting on meeting an arbitrary, politically motivated deadline, this government is clearly sacrificing quality legislation for speed. Now, this has led to the emergence of a patchwork of different approaches to cannabis across Canada that will likely be complex and varied and will put many Canadians in the position, perhaps, of breaking the law unintentionally. For example, some provinces may not allow any home growing. In fact, Quebec just announced this very measure. Some provinces may choose to lower the public possession limit from 30 grams. Some provinces may forbid public consumption. Some municipalities may ban cannabis sales and consumption completely. I want to be clear to any Canadians watching this. The Liberals put forth legislation that allows the provinces to actually deviate from being allowed to grow 4 plants at home, to deviate from being legally able to carry 30 grams of cannabis in public. So when those that are searching and waiting, as they've waited for decades and decades for cannabis legalization, want this bill to be passed, they should be aware that federal leadership for a national legalized structure for cannabis is not going to be delivered by this bill, and we see that already, as I've mentioned with the Quebec example, where you will not be able to grow plants at home in Quebec. I don't think that's what cannabis advocates have been working for all these years.